Right. Okay. Hey, good to see you, Farhan.
Good to see you again. How's everything?
Yeah, good.
Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we just wanted to go around and ask some missionaries and knowledgeable people question. I know you're not a
I'm not a scholar,
missionary,
not a missionary, but
you're the librarian,
well,
so
librarian,
you probably read a bit.
Yeah, I can refer you to a book.
Yeah, so we don't expect you necessarily to have all the answers.
Yeah, I
but
understand.
just thought we'd kind of pull around and talk to people.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So we want to ask some questions about basically foundational stories or narratives, accounts in the Islamic telling of them, which may have some differences in compared to how we see things from a biblical perspective.
Okay.
Right? So one thing we wanted to ask about it relates to Ishmael and Abraham.
Okay.
So and what would the, I guess, Islamic, but also maybe specifically Ahmadiyya view, if there's a difference, be on Abraham bringing Ishmael and Hagar down to Mecca, and then later building the Kaaba. Could you tell us kind of that story?
Yeah, so in the Ahmadiyya tradition, compared to the Sunni tradition, there's no difference really.
Okay.
This is a very common tradition amongst us. Abraham, who we see as a great prophet of God, was promised children. He was promised to have a legacy, a great nation. We actually agree with the biblical account on this, where God told Abraham that he will have a son and that he will have a great nation. Now, who we believe to be that first son is Ishmael, which is different than the Christian tradition. Generally speaking, Abraham alayhi salam, we say peace be upon him, he was married to his first wife, Sarah, and they did not have children. And he became very old, and God, in the Quran, it's mentioned that angels came to Abraham and gave him the good news that he will have a son.
He prayed for a son, right? Is that it?
That there is a prayer in the Holy Quran about him asking for a son as well. So an angel came to him, met him and his wife, and they were given this good news, and she laughed.
Right.
So that's one of the accounts that's in the Holy Quran. And when she laughed, the word is actually used to name the son as well.
Yes.
Right. So laughter means
that's in the Bible.
It says exactly right. So that son is Isaac. Before that, we have Ishmael, which means God has heard. So he's made this prayer. God hears his prayer, and this is through another wife. She's known as Hagar in the Old Testament. We call her Hajra in Islamic literature. And our point of view on this actually is very similar to the Jewish view on this.
Okay.
In Jewish literature, especially Talmudic, they have a high regard for Hagar or Hajra because they see her as as a woman who experienced revelation. And because she experienced revelation, she is actually very highly regarded as a pious woman. We see, from our point of view, and I'm saying us, including Sunni.
Okay.
At that point, because this is something.
Would they say that she got revelation? I don't know if they would say that.
Who, Sunnis?
Yeah.
Well, this is.
It might be resistant to women having revelation. I feel like
no. In the Quran, there's mention of women having revelation.
Okay.
Yeah, even Mary had revelation.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong.
This is before the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, so there's no issue about revelation now. This is before, right? So, so Jewish scholars do revere her for that.
Yeah.
There's contention about her status.
Right.
We, from our reading of the Bible, we do see her as his wife, his legitimate wife, and in Islam, we do see her as his legitimate wife as well. And the fact that the promises that were given to Abraham that are mentioned in the Bible have come to fruition as well. He does have a good, sizable nation, just as Isaac has a sizable nation. So we see that it's all coming together as God planned it. Now, the way we see it in terms of what happened, why did they stop living together? Why did Hagar
separation
have to go to Mecca? So there's two parts to this, and this is all based on other text, pretty much. There's a hint of it in the Holy Quran, but not by name.
You mean like hadith and
No,
the other texts?
and other texts. I mean Jewish literature.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there was a bit of a jealousy. The kids were playing.
Oh, okay.
Something
Yeah.
happened. One mother didn't like it. She
Right.
told her husband, "I don't want this woman around and her child around. Take her away." Now he's not obligated to listen to her. Although back in those days, there was a different concept of when you had multiple spouses. Before Islam, one wife was generally seen as more superior than the other. In Islam, there's no such thing as like that. In Islam, when you have multiple wives, each is independently equal to the husband, and he has to take care of them equally.
Sure.
There's no bigger or younger or anything like that.
Right.
But in this situation, she was an older or because a senior wife. You could say,
Sure.
I don't even know what to term that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not our culture right now. She had a bit of superiority in that sense, but we don't see it that he obeyed her or he gave into her wishes. We see it that God also told him, it's okay.
Yeah.
Take your wife, take her to this valley, and she'll be fine.
Right.
Okay? And that's what he does. He takes Ishmael, he takes Hagar, they go to this valley. And this is when he's very young. Right? So in the Islamic...
When Ishmael's young.
When Ishmael's young, yeah.
How about how young would
Oh, it's like an infant.
an infant?
And you
Yeah.
can barely walk.
Yeah.
So Hagar is like, okay, I'm in this desert area. There's no food here. She's frantic. The baby's crying. In the Islamic tradition, she runs back and forth between Safa and Marwa, looking for food, looking for water. And then she comes back and she finds Ishmael on the ground. And somehow there's a fountain at his feet, which continues till this day as the fountain of Zamzam,
Yeah.
which is in Mecca and which people have been drinking water from for thousands or
Right.
plus years
And
now.
people, for viewers who are not familiar,
Yeah.
this would be if somebody travels and participates in the Hajj pilgrimage,
Yeah.
they would probably drink from.
Oh, absolutely.
Zamzam well,
Oh, yeah,
right?
they would absolutely
And
go.
Marwa Safa is like sort of a ritual. They reenact it, sort of.
It's a reenactment of her plight, with the knowing that after struggle you do have fulfillment. God does hear your prayer. He does answer and fulfill your needs. So this is one of the instances when Abraham left her there. He went back to Sarah. Then he comes back, and he's a bit older now. Ishmael's older now.
Right.
And they rebuild the Kaaba together.
Right.
And this is mentioned in the Holy Quran that him and Ishmael, they had the ruins of the Kaaba and they rebuilt it. This is a long time ago, so not everything's documented, right?
Sure.
This is the middle of the desert, literally, right? So we only have the Islamic literature, biblical literature to go off
Right.
of.
So let me come back.
Yeah, sure.
So before Abraham returned, so he departed from there and went back to Canaan, right? So then Hajar and Ishmael were left. The valley was Mecca, right?
Yep.
Okay. Before there was a city, and then would you also agree that you would accept the source that talks about the Jurhum tribe moves in? The Jurhum tribe.
I'm not
The
familiar.
Arab tribe, so it's in Bukhari. It's the same hadith that talks about.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. Oh, okay. So, basically, the idea is they see a bird circling in the air in the distance,
Okay.
and the bird is circling over the well,
Okay.
right? And they had assumed there was no water there, but because the angel opened up the well, now the bird saw the water.
Okay.
So they sent scouts
To see what's going on over there. Okay. I
They
see.
came along. They stumbled upon Hajar and Ishmael,
Okay.
and they brought their people over, and the Jurhum tribe moved in and lived there with them. And then Ishmael was raised in that tribe, learned Arabic, and married a woman from the tribe at the age of puberty.
Okay. Sure.
Right? Is that familiar? A
I
little
haven't
bit?
read that hadith at all.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so like right away.
Okay.
It's
So,
probably there.
But you know the other elements they were sharing about. So
Yeah, yeah.
those
Like,
are
I
all
can talk
in the
about
same.
what
Okay.
yeah.
That's great. So, but none of that seems like
Unheard of.
incorrect.
No, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it makes sense.
Okay.
Because there were promises about this, right? There was
Right.
promises that this will be a prosperous area.
Right. Well, and also
So with their coming brings this prosperity.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Okay. He wants to ask another question.
Okay.
So, okay. Then you said years later, Abraham returned, and they built the Kaaba
They really
together.
thought we got it. Yeah.
One question we have, looking at our sources and also knowing that in Islamic tradition or practice, I should say, Muslims also men get circumcised, right?
Yes.
Okay, and that, as far as we understand, is it correct to say that that follows the tradition of Ishmael being
Abraham.
circumcised?
Abraham.
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 Okay, not
Abraham,
Ishmael.
Abraham gets sacrificed as a father first, right?
Yes.
And then this is the tradition he gives his sons as well.
Right. So that would also follow the idea that Ishmael would have been circumcised as well. Okay. So we noticed we couldn't find really any mention of his circumcision in the sources. So do you have any sense of when Ishmael would have been circumcised? Would it be before he took him down as an infant to?
I would assume so. I mean, he got when this is part of the covenant, right?
Right.
In the Bible.
In the Bible, yes.
So we, like I said, there's not much literature from that time.
Right.
We just have to go based on whatever historical information came. We don't have any reason to doubt that he wasn't circumcised early. He could have been circumcised later too.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any problem with either way.
Okay. And then one another question: when I think about the order of events of in the Islamic accounts, I read about different things, and then but I'm not sure how to put it together. So
that's what I say. This whole thing is very confusing.
So one of them is okay. So what you shared, he brings them down when Ishmael's an infant. He leaves, and then he returns sometime years later.
Yeah.
And they build the Kaaba.
Yeah.
But another event
he comes back.
Is another event that's not in that hadith that tells that whole story is what's mentioned in the Quran in Surah 37 about the offering of Ishmael.
Exactly. So that's another incident.
Was that before? Was that before they built the Kaaba or after they built the Kaaba?
I would say it's after because of the conversation that happens. The conversation that happens is Abraham asks his son, "This is the dream that I've seen. What do you make of it?" And the son is sensible enough at that age to say to him, "Father, do what God has commanded you to do." Mm-hmm. Right?
Like he's a willing participant.
He's a willing participant, right? So
okay.
Now this is actually very telling because it shows the upbringing that he received from his mother, right? Okay. Hajra. Because his mother's not mentioned in this instance. Mm-hmm. It's not Abraham asking.
She's never mentioned in the Quran, I don't think.
She's not asked.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to do this to our son.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And neither is Sarah mentioned about in this regard, right? So what this shows is that Ishmael's answer at that time, to my point, my reading of it, it reflects the upbringing that he received from his parents, mother and father, and even his co-mother, right?
Sure.
Sarah. Right?
Although what's interesting though is so in that hadith, so maybe I'll ask that as a question. So when we were going through the story of Abraham bringing them down there and then returning some years later to build the Kaaba, is it your sense of things? Not to say that, you know.
Well, I don't know the hadith, so
but is your perception of that account, not relying necessarily on that hadith, but is your perception of the timing of it that this is the first time Abraham's returning to see his son?
No.
Or would he have returned other times before that time to build?
I would think he would have returned multiple times.
Okay.
Because it says that when Ishmael was old enough to run and walk with his father.
That's Surah 37 when he offers him.
Exactly, right? So it means that they've already been engaged, like as father and son.
So what's interesting about that is that leads me. Well, on the one hand, I would like, okay, it makes sense to me that it's after the Kaaba, but the other thing that's restraining me from seeing the sacrifices after is that point actually the age that it mentions there, while it doesn't give a number, it says once he reached that age, then he had the dream and then he took him, right? So that doesn't suggest
that's
to me
why it's very confusing to align.
Right, so that's why I've had questions.
I've had the same question because it's not chronologically mentioned.
Right.
You have to piece it together. And you bring up a good point, I think.
And if you look at, I'll share the hadith is, I think it's Sahih Bukhari 3364, where it gives the narration. There's another one there too. Okay. And interesting the way that it phrases it. Basically, when it tells the story of Abraham leaving them, he departs, he goes back to Canaan. Then it says that the Jurhum tribe moves in, and Ishmael's raised in that tribe from infancy, learns Arabic. Then Hajar dies, and before she dies, he has a marriage arranged with a woman from the tribe. So he marries an Arab woman, has Arab children. Okay.
This is Ishmael?
Ishmael.
Okay.
And then after that, Abraham returns. And the way that it phrases it, it is very suggestive or implicit, at least, that this is the first time he's returning
Okay,
to see his son.
I see.
So that's why it's a little bit puzzling for me, because the Quran seems to say when he reached the age to be able to work with him, and like he was a shepherd in ancient times, you don't have to be that old to work with a shepherd, right?
I don't know. Like,
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Anyway, so
Yeah.
I'm just trying to piece it. So it's interesting to hear general. We're just asked different people
Yeah.
their takes, because I've heard different explanations and maybe there's different opinions.
That's the thing. Like all of these are historical accounts that may or may not be true, right? Or may not be as accurate. Like we're in the middle of the desert. No one's writing stuff down.
Right.
This is all oral tradition that eventually got written
So
down.
for me as a Christian, then, and this is not meant to be a debate or
Oh, absolutely.
criticism, but from my perception, I want to know what's true, right? So when I look at the different narratives, obviously there's the biblical narrative, and we're not even haven't even explored that much here.
Well, there's
today.
biblical,
But-
then there's Talmudic, then there's oral.
okay, yes,
there's all
and
those
so
things. Yeah.
and sometimes when I look at the Talmudic sources, which are much later, okay, they contradict, okay, the biblical source. So I looked at Scripture, the Bible, as not a human rabbinical teaching, but then
Yeah, we have no flexibility, right?
Right.
You, as a Christian, would stick to the Bible. We have the flexibility
Right.
to get
but it's just like you're not going to accept somebody came up with something after Quran or
Well, it's not
accepted
100%.
thing.
It's still
Yeah.
just possibility.
So when I look at the narratives, though, I would look at, okay, the Islamic narrative is Abraham brings them down to Mecca. That ends up being the foundation, I would say, like a foundational piece for the Islamic claims. Because let me put it as a question, and it's a total hypothetical.
Yeah, no
okay?
problem. No.
If Abraham and Ishmael never traveled to Mecca
Yep.
and they never built the Kaaba, what would the implications of that be for Islam as a religion?
Well,
Just hypothetically. This is not about doubt or anything.
well, this is the whole thing. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff aligning here, right?
Yeah.
What if he never got a second marriage,
Sure.
right? Then there would be no Islam at all.
Well, so according to the Torah,
Yeah.
he did not travel there.
Okay.
Okay. So just as one point of a difference, and they didn't build the Kaaba according to Torah.
Okay.
So that's the issue, like foundational pieces in the narrative. So we're looking at the narratives and we're comparing, we're trying to see what makes the most sense historically and reliability wise. And so that's what it comes down to. So if they didn't travel there, they didn't build a Kaaba, what would the implication of that be?
I mean, then you'd have to say that it's all made up,
Right.
and then you have to prove that.
For whatever reason.
Because you already have the people living there, and it's their oral
Yep.
tradition. So it's comparing one oral tradition to another oral tradition, basically.
Well, the Bible's written, right?
It's later on, obviously, right? And we're not like, remember, although you're taking it from a Christian angle, we're talking about Judaism now,
No, we're talking about the biblical text.
which is Judaism.
No.
You're taking, well,
I'm a Christian, so I accept Old Testament.
yeah, so, right, all of this stuff is in the Old Testament,
Yeah.
which is Jewish text.
Yeah, but that's part of what Christianity is.
I know. So from your angle, you're going to look at it as a Christian angle, right?
Yeah, but there's no difference on that point.
Well, I would say there is.
No, I mean, between rabbinical Jews who don't accept Jesus as Messiah and Christians, we have the same text.
Yes.
So, and especially on the account about Abraham and Ishmael and where they traveled, who he married, all those things.
Well,
that's all the same between us. So that's not like a Jewish thing versus a Christian thing.
There's a slight difference because you will only rely on the Bible, right? They will refer to their Talmud and their oral Torah and their other traditions.
Even-
their Midrash and
yeah.
all these other texts.
I know,
That they,
yeah.
like, that's
Even-
part of
yeah.
their theology, right?
Sure,
I
absolutely.
would accept
that would be a fundamental difference for sure.
And that's what I'm referring to.
But I'm just talking about the narrative. There, we wouldn't differ on those points that we're talking about.
So according to these other texts that Judaism accepts, Abraham later on went back and married Hagar, or went to live with Hagar again.
That, yes, that's a difference.
Right.
And rabbinical.
So that
views.
contradicts the hadith that we just spoke about, which said that Hagar died and then,
That as well, yes.
right? So that's what I mean. There are other elements to this.
Yes.
And in the
But in the
Jewish
Torah,
tradition,
yeah,
Hagar is given a new name. She's
Yeah.
now called Keturah.
yeah. So
There's a lot of puzzle here.
but the rabbinical view is a clear contradiction with the Torah itself. So they tried to say that Hagar is Keturah. That's how they explain it.
Right.
But if you read the actual book, it doesn't allow for that.
That's another discussion altogether.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So, but they're push it in a way that's not.
Well, because they see all these other texts as filling gaps in the Torah, right?
Yeah,
From a Christian point of view, that Torah is it. For them, there's gaps in the Torah.
Yeah, we would say they are changing the Torah outside the Torah by rewriting stories. They're not changing what's in it.
Right.
The text stays the same.
Yeah.
But they're writing other stories to reframe the narratives. So they have other narratives that, like you said, fill in gaps.
Yeah.
Or they take a point. They'll say, oh, maybe Keturah actually is Hagar, right?
Right.
And it's so then it becomes a way of, by rereading it like that, it sort of reunites Abraham with Hagar, but there's nothing
because
in that
there's
the text.
the angle that they take is different than the Christian angle usually.
Yeah.
They have respect for Hagar. Christians usually do not have respect for her.
Okay,
right?
well, I wouldn't say we don't respect her. It's just
well, let's say they have more respect.
It's just a different account, right?
I don't know if it's a different account, but for example, they would view her as a legitimate wife and a pious lady who received revelation.
Genesis doesn't.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Judaism, right?
Not Judaism. Oh, you're
For the books.
what's that?
For the books,
The
otherwise.
books? Yeah. Let's talk. Yeah. Is there anything else?
No, because the reason I mentioned it because for them those are authentic sources. They may not be for you, which is fine.
Yeah.
But to them, they're authentic sources.
Sorry?
We don't have a rabbi.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for them because they may have different opinions on which sources and their.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, out of respect for what I've read of their material,
Yeah.
I would make sure that that's included in the conversation. I don't see any reason to exclude their traditions. I understand the point of view of stick to the Torah because that's what's written, right? But their perspective is that there are gaps in there that are filled by other teachings. I
interact with it. I would just say it's so many hundreds of years after the biblical text, so it has no historical value.
That's possible.
Right?
That's
so
possible.
That's why I would just say they're.
I mean, the only difference there would be that one got written, one didn't. Right? One is oral still.
Not just that. You're talking about like many centuries difference and.
Oh yeah, we talk about. They still believe Hagar was departed from Abraham when Ishmael was about 17 years old.
Okay.
age.
Yeah. So
they agree with
in other words, like some of the key differences, we're looking at the biblical account from the Islamic account, which we haven't even identified all of them in the conversation.
Yeah, I think for that you would actually need all the sources in front of us. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're just going
we're just pointing out that we're just saying at least that even from a rabbinical perspective that adds in all these stories that we would say in their midrashic sources that are not reliable and basically fabricated in our point of view. So even with that, it's still the basic story follows the biblical narrative and not the Islamic narrative. So we're not at this point saying what's right and wrong, etc.
Absolutely.
We're just more wanting to explore
there's a lot
what
of
is your perspective on the Islamic.
There's a lot of differences in the stories that are mentioned in the Holy Quran and the biblical literature, right?
Yeah.
So that's a given. There's no problem with that.
Okay.
We would obviously stick to our, because we deem our holy book to be revelation, right?
Yeah.
So we would stick to what is mentioned in the Holy Quran.
Yeah.
And whatever detail is given is enough. I mean, this isn't that. It's there's a lot of lessons in that story about family, about commitment to God, about being able to sacrifice yourself for him and his mission and his will. The Quran's not meant to be a history book, right? It's not meant to. Like the Torah.
So would you say the stories are not historically true in the Quran?
No, they're historically true, but it's not meant to be a history book. Right? It's pointing out what the Quran mentions is that it was sent down to clarify disputes between other nations. So between Muslims and Jews, Christians and Jews, people of the book, it's meant to clarify the dispute so that we can move forward and not be hung up on the past.
Okay.
Right? And that's why there's all these topics that come up usually.
Okay.
Yeah, this is actually one of the verses in the Quran. And we sent it down to settle disputes of the people of the book.
Do you know what it is offhand, the reference?
I can look it up.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Because in that sense, I mean, it calls itself a Furqan and a Muhaymin,
Yep.
which means that it settles the matter.
Yeah.
These are two parties that
I know Muhammad is Surah 5, 48 or 49 in your version. And Furqan is in different places.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And if that's its purpose, then it doesn't need to go into all the details. God's given his judgment, black and white, good to go, right?
Okay, yeah. So for us, we obviously want to know which is God's judgment, right? So that's why we have these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're trying to look at what makes the most sense in terms of reliability, historically, what seems to be factually true.
Yeah,
so it's important, I think we're going to agree on this. We can close on this point, I think, is that it's important to explore and study and examine and search for the truth.
I'm telling you, there's so much information out there. Like when I started looking at the Midrash and the Jewish, I was blown away.
Yeah.
The amount of detail that's in there. Like,
oh, it's crazy. It's a lot of stories.
And a lot of things that they talk about there will resolve problems that we have today. Like just the fact that they respect Hagar would solve a lot of problems between Muslims and Christians.
Okay.
Right? I mean, it's good information.
All right. Well, really good talking to you, Farhan.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you go.
Sure.
But,
thanks again.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.